Mom, we've discussed this extensively, and there's really no other option. You need someone here 24/7, and we've already scheduled interviews with 3 different home care agencies. The words came from my eldest son, David, as he sat across from me at my own dining room table, his expensive suit perfectly pressed, his expression a mixture of forced patience and barely concealed frustration. To his left sat my daughter Jennifer, her real estate agent smile plastered on her face like she was trying to sell me a house I didn't want. On his right, my youngest, Michael, clutched a manila folder thick with what I could only assume were more reasons why I couldn't be trusted to live my own life anymore. The afternoon sun streaming through my kitchen window seemed to mock the darkness of this moment. This was supposed to be my sanctuary, the home where I'd raised these 3 children, where their father Carlos and I had shared 32 years of marriage before cancer took him from me 4 years ago. The yellow walls I'd painted myself last spring, the ceramic fruit bowl Jennifer had made in high school pottery class, the family photos chronicling decades of birthdays and holidays. Everything in this room told the story of a woman who had built a life, not someone who needed to be managed like a problem to be solved. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Linda Martinez, and until that suffocating Tuesday afternoon in October, I thought I was navigating my retirement years exactly as I'd planned. At 68 years old, I was a woman who had dedicated 35 years of her life to teaching 3rd graders at Roosevelt Elementary School here in Riverside, California. I'd watched thousands of children learn to read, helped them through playground tears, and celebrated their small victories with the same enthusiasm I'd shown my own kids. When people asked me about retirement, I used to joke that I'd never really retire from caring about education. Once a teacher, always a teacher. The truth was, I'd been enjoying these past 3 years more than I'd expected. After Carlos passed, I worried I'd feel lost without the rhythm of our shared life, the comfortable routine we'd built together. But I'd surprised myself by discovering a version of Linda Martinez that I'd almost forgotten existed. The woman who had dreams beyond being someone's wife or someone's mother, though I'd loved both those roles deeply. My mornings started with coffee on the back patio, watching the hummingbirds that had claimed my salvias as their personal buffet. I'd planted that garden myself after Carlos died, needing something to nurture, something that would bloom and thrive under my care. The physical work had been therapeutic, and the results were honestly spectacular. My neighbors often stopped to compliment the riot of colors that transformed with each season. Autumn mums giving way to winter pansies, spring tulips yielding to summer's explosion of zinnias and marigolds. After my garden communion, I'd walk the 3 miles through Meadowbrook Park, greeting the other regulars, Mrs. Chen with her ancient corgi, the group of power-walking moms who'd graduated from pushing strollers to discussing college applications, the retired postal worker who collected litter with the dedication he'd once reserved for delivering mail. These weren't deep friendships exactly, but they were connections, threads that wove me into the fabric of my community in a way that felt meaningful. Tuesdays and Thursdays, I volunteered at the Riverside Community Center, helping adults work toward their GED certificates. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was still teaching, still watching that magical moment when comprehension dawned in someone's eyes. My student Maria, a 42-year-old single mother, had finally mastered long division just last month. Her tears of joy had reminded me why I'd chosen education in the first place. There's nothing quite like being part of someone's breakthrough moment. The afternoons were mine to spend as I pleased. Sometimes I'd meet my neighbor Rosa for lunch at Oak Street Cafe, where we'd solve the world's problems over turkey clubs and sweet tea. Rosa, at 70, was my role model for aging gracefully but stubbornly. She'd buried 2 husbands, raised 5 children, and still insisted on climbing onto her roof each fall to clean her own gutters. "The day I can't take care of my own house," she'd declare, "is the day they can plant me in the ground next to it." Other days, I'd lose myself in the mystery novels that had become my guilty pleasure. Carlos used to tease me about my dead body books, but I'd discovered that there was something deeply satisfying about following clues, about the orderly revelation of truth that always came in the final chapters. Life rarely offered such neat resolutions, but fiction could be counted on to make sense of chaos. Evenings were for phone calls with my scattered grandchildren. David's twins were both away at college now, one studying engineering like her grandfather had, the other pursuing art therapy. Jennifer's son was finishing high school and applying to music programs, his trumpet skills having earned him attention from several prestigious conservatories. Michael's daughter, my youngest grandchild at 14, would text me photos of her, science fair projects and soccer goals, maintaining the kind of relationship with technology that both impressed and mystified me. I'd also been managing my finances with a care and attention that would have surprised my children if they'd bothered to ask. Carlos had been the investor in our family, but in the 4 years since his death, I'd discovered I had quite an aptitude for understanding market trends and making strategic decisions about our portfolio. The life insurance money, combined with our modest savings and my teacher's pension, had grown steadily under my careful management. I'd even moved some investments into growth stocks that had performed beautifully, something Carlos had always been too conservative to try. But none of this mattered to my 3 adult children as they sat in my kitchen that October afternoon, armed with their folders and their certainty that they knew what was best for their declining mother. The conversation had started innocuously enough. David had called the previous weekend, saying he wanted to drive down from San Francisco to discuss some family matters. Jennifer had volunteered to coordinate everyone's schedules, and Michael had taken the afternoon off work. I'd actually been pleased that they were making the effort to spend time together. Our family gatherings had become less frequent since Carlos died, and I missed the chaos of having everyone under one roof. I'd spent the morning preparing their favorite foods, the way mothers do. David's beloved tamales, which took me 3 hours to assemble, but were worth it for the way his eyes lit up when he saw them cooling on the counter. Jennifer's requested spinach salad with strawberries and feta, the recipe she'd been asking me to write down for 10 years, but somehow never remembered to actually make herself. Michael's chocolate chip cookies, soft in the center the way he'd preferred them since he was 7 years old. The irony was crushing now. I'd been taking care of them, demonstrating the very competence they were about to question, and they'd been planning this intervention while eating the food I'd lovingly prepared. The conversation had begun with what I now recognized as a carefully rehearsed script. David, as the eldest and most successful, had naturally assumed the role of family spokesperson. His corner office overlooking the San Francisco Bay had apparently qualified him to make decisions about his mother's life. Jennifer, with her talent for making even the most unwelcome news sound reasonable, had provided the emotional manipulation, disguised as concern. Michael, ever the numbers man, had brought the spreadsheets and cost analyses that were supposed to make their proposal seem not just necessary, but financially prudent. "Mom, we need to talk about what happened last month," David had begun, his tone suggesting I was a child who needed to be guided toward an obvious conclusion. He was referring to my fall in the garden, an incident that had taken on mythical proportions in my children's minds. I'd been planting bulbs for spring, working in a patch near the back fence where the ground was uneven. The garden hose had gotten tangled around my ankle, and when I stepped backward, I'd lost my balance and gone down hard on my hip. It had hurt, certainly, and I'd scraped my knee badly enough to require bandages, but it was hardly a catastrophic event. The problem was that Rosa had witnessed the whole thing from her kitchen window. Being Rosa, she'd immediately rushed over to help, insisting on cleaning my cuts and making me promise to call my doctor. Being Rosa, she'd also felt compelled to call David and inform him that his mother had taken a bad fall and might need checking on. Within hours, my phone had been ringing constantly, David demanding to know why I hadn't called him immediately, Jennifer insisting I needed to see a doctor right away. Michael wanting to know if I'd hit my head, if I'd blacked out, if there were underlying health issues I hadn't shared with them. Their concern had felt suffocating rather than comforting, and I'd made the mistake of admitting that I'd been having some dizzy spells lately, and that yes, I'd had a minor fender bender the previous month when I'd gotten momentarily confused about which pedal was the brake. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. These admissions had apparently set off alarm bells that had been ringing in my children's heads for weeks, culminating in this carefully orchestrated meeting. The fall was concerning enough, Jennifer was saying now. Her real estate training, evident in the way she was building her case point by point. But when we add in the car accident, the memory issues you've mentioned, and the fact that you're living alone in a house that's clearly too big for you to maintain safely. Her voice trailed off, leaving the implication hanging in the air like smoke from a fire I couldn't see but could definitely smell. What memory issues? I asked, genuinely confused. I'd been forgetting little things lately, where I'd put my reading glasses, whether I'd already watered the front flower bed, the name of that actor in the movie I'd watched last week. Normal things that everyone my age experienced, or so. I'd thought. Michael opened his folder and pulled out a legal pad covered with his neat handwriting. You called me 3 times last month asking about Dad's life insurance, Mom. Each time you seemed surprised when I told you we'd already discussed it. You've asked Jennifer about her house hunting clients multiple times, forgetting that she'd already told you about them. And when David visited in August, you made dinner plans with him for a restaurant that's been closed for 2 years. Each example felt like a small betrayal, evidence they'd been collecting against me without my knowledge. Yes, I'd asked about the insurance because the paperwork was confusing and I wanted to make sure I understood it correctly. Yes, I'd asked Jennifer about her work because I was interested in her life and couldn't always keep track of which clients she'd mentioned before. And yes, I'd suggested Antonelli's for dinner with David because it had been our special place for years, and I hadn't realized it had closed because I'd been avoiding that part of town since Carlos died. Too many memories. But somehow, in my children's eyes, these normal human moments of forgetfulness had become symptoms of cognitive decline, serious enough to warrant taking away my independence. There's also the financial situation to consider, David continued, and I felt my stomach drop. What financial situation? I'd been managing my money carefully, even successfully. What could they possibly know about my finances that I didn't? We know you've been moving money around, Mom, he said gently, as if he were explaining something to one of the 3rd graders I used to teach. Large withdrawals, changes to investment accounts. We're worried that you might be making decisions. You don't fully understand, or worse, that someone might be taking advantage of you. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. Someone taking advantage of me? The large withdrawals he was referring to were the money I'd moved into higher yield savings accounts after researching better interest rates. The investment changes were strategic rebalancing that had actually improved my portfolio's performance. But somehow, my financial acumen had been reframed as evidence of confusion or vulnerability. I'd like to see these records you're talking about, I said, my voice sharper than I'd intended. Jennifer reached across the table and patted my hand, the gesture so condescending I had to resist the urge to pull away. Mom, that's exactly what we're talking about. You're getting defensive about things that don't make sense. We're not attacking you. We're trying to help you. The phrase, things that don't make sense, echoed in my head. When had my life stopped making sense to the people who were supposed to know me best? When had I become a puzzle they needed to solve, rather than a person they loved and respected? We've researched several excellent home care agencies, Michael was saying now, pulling brochures from his folder with the efficiency of someone who'd already made all the important decisions. Full-time, live-in companions who specialize in seniors with early-stage cognitive challenges. They can help with medication management, meal preparation, transportation, and general safety monitoring. Cognitive challenges. The phrase made me want to scream. I was sitting here having a perfectly rational conversation with them, defending my choices and my competence, and they were talking about me as if I were already gone, as if the mother they'd known had been replaced by someone who needed constant supervision. The cost is significant, David admitted, but we've run the numbers, and using your savings and Dad's life insurance, you can afford quality care for several years. It's actually more economical than assisted living, and it means you can stay in your own home. Stay in my own home, but not live my own life. The distinction was crucial, though they didn't seem to understand it. They were offering me the illusion of independence while systematically removing all the elements that made my life mine. I looked around my kitchen table at these 3 adults I'd raised, wondering when they'd stopped seeing me as their mother and started viewing me as their responsibility. David, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged and whose heartbreaks I'd counseled through. Jennifer, who'd called me crying from college homesickness and asked for my advice on everything from career choices to whether to marry James. Michael, my baby, who'd been afraid of thunderstorms until he was 12 and would still call me when he was having trouble sleeping. When had I become the problem they needed to manage rather than the person they came to for wisdom and support? I need some time to think about this, I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. David's expression tightened with what I recognized as barely controlled impatience. Mom, we've already contacted the agencies. We have interviews scheduled for this weekend. The sooner we get someone in place, the safer you'll be. Safer. As if my independence were a dangerous thing. As if the life I'd built for myself were somehow a threat that needed to be neutralized. You've scheduled interviews without asking me? We wanted to present you with viable options, Jennifer said, her sales training evident in the way she was trying to frame their presumption as consideration. We know this is a big adjustment, but we're going to be here to help you through it. Help me through it. As if I were a patient recovering from surgery rather than a competent adult whose opinion should matter in decisions about her own life. The rest of the conversation passed in a blur of logistics and reassurances that felt more like warnings. They'd identified potential caregivers. They'd researched costs and coverage. They'd even discussed how to modify the house to accommodate someone who would be monitoring my every move, ensuring I didn't make any more dangerous decisions like planting bulbs or managing my investments. By the time they left that evening, I felt as if I'd been diagnosed with a terminal illness I didn't know I had. The house felt different around me. No longer my sanctuary, but a stage where I'd soon be performing the role of the grateful invalid under the watchful eye of a stranger, whose job would be to make sure I didn't trust my own judgment. I sat alone in my living room as the sun set, surrounded by the photographs and mementos of a life I'd thought I was still living. Pictures of my grandchildren's graduations, certificates of appreciation from my teaching career, the small watercolor Carlos had painted of our garden during his brief artistic phase after retirement. Everything in this room told the story of a woman who had loved and been loved, who had contributed and been valued, who had made good decisions and built something meaningful. But apparently, that woman was disappearing, at least in the eyes of the people who mattered most to me. Apparently, she was being replaced by someone who needed constant supervision, someone whose choices couldn't be trusted, someone whose independence was a luxury the family could no longer afford to indulge. The most crushing part wasn't the loss of freedom they were proposing. It was the realization that they'd been watching me fail for months without saying anything, collecting evidence of my decline like prosecutors building a case. Every forgotten name, every repeated question, every moment of normal human forgetfulness had been cataloged and analyzed, transformed from the ordinary experiences of aging into symptoms of incompetence. I wondered if this was how it always happened. Not with dramatic moments of crisis, but with slow erosions of trust, gradual assumptions of incapacity, loving children who decided their parents' lives needed managing before the parents realized their autonomy was under attack. As I prepared for bed that night, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back at me. Not because I looked older or frailer, but because I looked defeated in a way I'd never seen before. My children's assessment of my capabilities had somehow become more real to me than my own experience of my competence. That's when I realized I had a choice to make. I could accept their version of who I was becoming, or I could fight to remain who I'd always been. I could submit to their well-meaning management, or I could prove that their mother wasn't disappearing. She was just getting started. The woman who looked back at me from that mirror had taught school for 35 years, had raised 3 successful children, had managed her finances through market crashes and recoveries, had survived the death of her partner and built a meaningful life on her own terms. That woman wasn't ready to be managed by anyone, no matter how much they loved her. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was up against. I needed to know just how serious my children were about this caregiver plan, and I needed to figure out how to show them that their mother was far from ready to surrender control of her own life. The battle for my independence was about to begin, though I had no idea yet how dramatically it would transform not just my relationship with my children, but my understanding of my own strength and capabilities. All I knew that night was that I wasn't ready to become the person they thought I needed to be, and I was willing to fight to remain the person I'd always been. Sleep refused to come that night. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling fan Carlos had installed when we first moved into this house 32 years ago, listening to its familiar whir and trying to make sense of what had happened in my kitchen hours earlier. The events kept replaying in my mind like a broken record, each repetition making the reality more difficult to accept. My own children, the people I had sacrificed everything for, had made a unilateral decision about my future, based on their interpretation of my capabilities rather than any honest assessment of my actual needs. The morning light filtering through my bedroom curtains found me already dressed and sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a legal pad. If my children wanted to treat this like a business decision, complete with research and documentation, then I would approach it the same way. But unlike them, I would start with the facts rather than assumptions. I began by writing down everything they had cited as evidence of my decline. The fall in the garden, which had been purely accidental and resulted in nothing more serious than a scraped knee and bruised ego. The minor car accident, which had happened because I was distracted thinking about my grocery list, not because of any cognitive impairment. The repeated questions about Carlos's life insurance, which stemmed from my desire to understand complex financial documents, not from memory loss. The forgotten restaurant closure, which was really about grief avoidance, rather than mental confusion. As I wrote each item down, I found myself getting angrier rather than more concerned. Every single piece of their evidence had a perfectly reasonable explanation that had nothing to do with cognitive decline and everything to do with being human. We all forget things. We all have accidents. We all sometimes need information repeated when it involves complicated financial or legal matters. But somehow, when these normal human experiences happened to a 68-year-old widow, they became symptoms requiring intervention. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that my children's concerns weren't really about my well-being at all. They were about their own fears and convenience. David, with his demanding career and young adult children, needed to know I was being managed so he wouldn't have to worry about getting calls about emergencies. Jennifer, juggling her real estate business and her teenage son's busy schedule, wanted the peace of mind that came with professional oversight of her mother. Michael, always the worrier, had probably been losing sleep over imagined scenarios of disasters that could befall his aging mother. A live-in caregiver would solve all their problems while creating an enormous one for me. They would sleep better at night, knowing someone was watching me around the clock. They wouldn't have to field calls from concerned neighbors or doctors. They wouldn't have to make difficult decisions about my care because those decisions would be made by a professional, whose job was to keep me safe rather than keep me happy. But I would lose everything that made my life worth living. My privacy, my autonomy, my ability to make simple decisions about how to spend my days, my sense of competence and self-worth. I would become a patient in my own home, managed and monitored, by someone who didn't know me or care about my dreams and preferences. The thought made me physically ill. Around 9 o'clock, I heard Rosa moving around in her backyard and decided I needed to talk to someone who might offer a different perspective. Rosa had known me for 15 years, had watched me navigate Carlos's illness and death, had seen me rebuild my life and find new purposes. If anyone could give me an honest assessment of my mental state, it would be her. I found her deadheading her chrysanthemums, a task that required the kind of careful attention to detail that belied her 70 years. Rosa had always been my role model for aging with dignity and stubbornness in equal measure. She climbed ladders to clean her own gutters, drove herself to doctor appointments in Los Angeles, and had recently taken up oil painting because she'd decided she wanted to try something new. "You look like someone who didn't sleep much," she observed without looking up from her flowers. "Rosa, can I ask you something honestly? Do you think I'm losing my mind?" Now she did look up, her weathered hands still holding the garden shears, her dark eyes sharp with concern. "What kind of question is that, Linda? What's happened?" I told her everything. The family meeting, the evidence they'd collected, their decision to hire a caregiver, their conviction that I was no longer competent to manage my own life. Rosa listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each detail. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, methodically cleaning soil from her gardening tools. Finally, she spoke. "You want to know what I think? I think your children are scared. Scared of getting older themselves. Scared of losing you the way you lost Carlos. Scared of having to make hard decisions about your care someday. But being scared doesn't give them the right to take away your life before you're ready to give it up." Her words hit me like a revelation. Of course they were scared. David was 45, old enough to start worrying about his own aging process. Jennifer was watching her teenage son prepare to leave for college, facing an empty nest and her own middle-age transitions. Michael, at 39, was probably beginning to understand that his parents weren't immortal, and that someday he might have to be the responsible adult making difficult decisions. Their solution was to get ahead of the problem by removing my agency before a crisis forced their hand. It was efficient, practical, and completely devastating to the person it was supposed to help. But Rosa, what if they're right? What if I am starting to decline and I just don't see it? She set down her tools and looked at me with the kind of directness that only comes from decades of friendship. "Linda, yesterday you helped Mrs. Patterson figure out her Medicare supplemental insurance when her own daughter couldn't make sense of it. Last week you balanced my checkbook because I'd made some error my accountant's son couldn't find. 3 days ago, you explained to that new teacher at the community center how to set up the GED testing schedule because you understood the requirements better than the program coordinator." She was right. I had been helping people, solving problems, demonstrating competence in ways my children either hadn't witnessed or had chosen to ignore. Their evidence of my decline was incomplete because they weren't present for the evidence of my continued capabilities. "You know what I think you should do?" Rosa continued. "I think you should get a complete physical and cognitive assessment from a doctor who doesn't know your family and doesn't have any preconceived notions about what a 68-year-old widow should or shouldn't be able to handle." The suggestion was brilliant in its simplicity. If my children wanted medical evidence for their concerns, then I would get medical evidence for my competence. I would arm myself with professional assessments that were based on actual testing, rather than anecdotal observations filtered through fear and assumption. "And Linda," Rosa added as I prepared to leave, "you might also want to take a hard look at your finances. If they're talking about using your money to pay for care you don't want or need, you should make sure you understand exactly where you stand financially and what your options are." Her advice sparked another realization. My children had mentioned being concerned about my financial decisions, but they'd been vague about specifics. David had said something about large withdrawals and investment changes, but he hadn't asked me to explain those transactions. They'd simply assumed that any financial activity they didn't understand must be evidence of confusion or vulnerability. I spent the rest of the morning calling to schedule appointments. First, I contacted Dr. Sarah Kim, a geriatrician at Riverside Medical Center who came highly recommended but had no previous relationship with my family. I explained that I needed a comprehensive evaluation of my physical and mental health for personal planning purposes. She had an opening the following Thursday. Next, I called my bank and asked to speak with someone in their financial planning department. I needed to review my accounts and get a clear picture of my financial position, something I should have done months ago instead of simply managing my investments in isolation. The representative transferred me to Patricia Williams, a certified financial planner who specialized in retirement and estate planning. Patricia's voice was warm but professional when she answered. "Mrs. Martinez, I understand you'd like to review your financial situation. Are you currently working with an advisor, or would this be an initial consultation?" "I've been managing everything myself since my husband died 4 years ago," I explained. "But my children have some concerns about my financial decisions, and I want to make sure I fully understand my position and my options." "That's very wise," she said. "Financial planning becomes more complex as we age, especially when family members have different perspectives about what's appropriate. Would you be available to meet next Tuesday afternoon? I'd like to spend adequate time reviewing your portfolio and discussing your goals." Her tone was respectful rather than condescending. She spoke to me as if I were a competent adult seeking professional advice, not a confused elderly person who needed to be managed. The difference was subtle but profound. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in months. I pulled out all my financial records and spread them across my dining room table, determined to understand exactly what my children had seen that concerned them so much. Carlos had always handled our investments, but since his death, I'd been learning as I went, making decisions based on research and common sense rather than formal training. What I found surprised me. Far from the financial confusion my children had implied, I discovered a portfolio that had grown significantly under my management. The large withdrawals David had mentioned were strategic moves I'd made to take advantage of better interest rates and investment opportunities. The concerning changes were actually rebalancing decisions that had improved my overall returns. I'd moved money out of low-yield savings accounts into certificates of deposit with better rates. I'd shifted some conservative investments into growth stocks that had performed beautifully. I'd even opened a small trading account where I'd been experimenting with index funds, an experiment that had paid off handsomely. Carlos would have been proud of me, I realized. He'd always been cautious with money, sometimes too cautious. I'd taken reasonable risks and seen significant rewards. My financial position was actually stronger than it had been when he died, despite having no earned income for the past 4 years. But my children had seen activity they didn't understand and jumped to conclusions about incompetence rather than asking me to explain my reasoning. They'd assumed that any financial decision they hadn't been consulted about must be evidence of poor judgment or outside manipulation. The revelation was both vindicating and infuriating. I wasn't the confused widow they'd portrayed in their intervention. I was a competent woman who had successfully managed her finances through a difficult transition period and come out ahead. But they'd never given me the chance to demonstrate that competence because they'd already decided what my capabilities were. That evening, I called my sister Carmen in Phoenix. Carmen was 5 years older than me, had been widowed for nearly a decade, and had successfully fought off her own children's attempts to manage her life. If anyone would understand what I was going through, it would be her. "They want to do what?" Carmen's voice rose in indignation when I explained the situation. "Linda, please tell me you're not seriously considering this." "I don't want to. But Carmen, what if they're right? What if I am declining and I just don't realize it?" "Honey, I'm going to tell you the same thing I told my kids when they tried this nonsense with me. Being 68 doesn't make you incompetent. Making a few mistakes doesn't make you incompetent. Forgetting things sometimes doesn't make you incompetent. You know what makes you incompetent? Actually being incompetent, which you're not. Her certainty was reassuring, but I needed more than emotional support. I needed practical advice from someone who had navigated this territory successfully. How did you handle it when your kids tried to intervene? I asked. I got myself a complete medical evaluation to prove I was fine. I got my finances professionally reviewed to show I was managing them well. And then I sat them down and told them that their mother wasn't going anywhere, and they could either respect my choices or explain to their children why they didn't see their grandmother anymore. Her approach was more confrontational than I felt ready for, but the underlying strategy was sound: gather evidence of competence, get professional validation, and present my children with facts rather than emotions. But Linda, Carmen continued, you also need to think about what you want your life to look like. For a woman who had taught third grade for 35 years, who was currently helping adults study for their GED exams, who managed her own investment portfolio. The suggestion was so absurd I almost laughed, but David was nodding approvingly, clearly impressed by her thoroughness. What about my finances? I pressed. I currently manage my own investments and banking. Gladys and David exchanged a look that spoke volumes about their shared assumptions regarding my capabilities. That's exactly the kind of responsibility we'd want to transition away from, she explained. Financial management can become quite complex for seniors, especially when cognitive changes begin to affect judgment. I'd work with your family to ensure all your needs are met without burdening you with those kinds of decisions. Without burdening me, as if managing my own money were a hardship rather than a source of pride and independence. As if the portfolio I'd successfully grown over 4 years were evidence of confusion rather than competence. The interview continued for another hour, with Gladys outlining her philosophy of care, which seemed to revolve around eliminating risk by eliminating choice. No more driving, because accidents could happen. No more cooking with the stove, because burns were possible. No more managing medications, because mistakes might occur. No more financial decisions, because confusion could lead to poor choices. Under her care, I would be safer but also completely dependent, protected but also imprisoned, cared for but also infantilized. Every aspect of my life would be filtered through her assessment of what was appropriate for someone with my supposed limitations. After Gladys left, David stayed behind to debrief, his enthusiasm for her approach evident in his relieved expression. She seems perfect, Mom. Really experienced, very thorough, and she clearly understands the challenges we're dealing with. What did you think? I chose my words carefully, not wanting to reveal my full strategy yet. She's certainly qualified. But David, I need you to understand something. The woman she described in that interview, someone who needs adult coloring books and can't be trusted with basic decisions. That's not me. I'm not there yet, and I may never be there. His face tightened with frustration. Mom, that's exactly what we're talking about. You don't see the changes we see. That's part of the problem. Then help me understand what you see, I said. Give me specific examples of decisions I've made that concern you. Show me evidence of this cognitive decline you're all so worried about. David pulled out his phone and scrolled through what appeared to be notes he'd been keeping. 2 weeks ago, you called Jennifer asking about a restaurant recommendation, then called her again 3 hours later asking the same question. Last month, you forgot that Michael's birthday was on a Wednesday and made plans to see him on Saturday. You've been moving money around in ways that don't make sense, large transfers between accounts with no clear purpose. Each example stung because they were true, but also because they were incomplete. I'd called Jennifer twice about restaurants because I'd been planning a dinner for Rosa's birthday and wanted to make sure I hadn't missed any new places she might enjoy. I'd initially forgotten what day Michael's birthday fell on because I'd been thinking about the date rather than the day of the week. A distinction that mattered for planning but not for caring. The money transfers had specific purposes that made perfect sense when understood in context. But David hadn't asked for context. He'd simply observed behavior that seemed inconsistent with his expectations and drawn conclusions about my mental state. The second caregiver interview was scheduled for Thursday, giving me time to process what I'd learned from the first. Mrs. Brenda Collins was younger than Gladys, probably in her early 40s, with a more cheerful demeanor, but ultimately the same philosophy about managing seniors. She specialized in what she called cognitive support for transitional seniors, which sounded more compassionate but amounted to the same systematic removal of autonomy. Jennifer attended this interview, bringing her teenage son Tommy along, ostensibly so he could meet the person who would be caring for his grandmother. Tommy, 16 and uncomfortable with adult conversations about aging and dependence, sat quietly in the corner playing games on his phone. But I noticed him looking up occasionally with expressions that suggested he found the whole situation as bizarre as I did. Brenda's approach was softer than Gladys's, but no less comprehensive in its assumption of my incompetence. She spoke about supporting my existing capabilities while providing structure for areas where I might be struggling. It sounded reasonable until she began listing the areas where she assumed I needed structure: meal planning, medication management, financial oversight, social activities, and something she called reality orientation. What exactly is reality orientation? I asked. It's a technique we use to help seniors who might be experiencing some confusion about time, place, or circumstances, she explained. We use calendars, clocks, photo albums, and conversation to keep clients grounded, in the present and aware of their surroundings. The implication was clear. She expected me to become confused about basic facts of my existence and would need professional help to remember who I was, where I lived, and what day it was. The assumption was so far from my current reality that it felt like science fiction, but Jennifer was nodding along as if it were a reasonable precaution. After Brenda left, I asked Jennifer to stay for a private conversation while Tommy waited in the car. "Honey, do you really think I need someone to help me remember what day it is?" Jennifer's expression was pained, the look of someone who loved me but had already made up her mind about what was best for me. "Mom, it's not about what you need right now. It's about what you might need in 6 months or a year. Brenda is experienced with clients who are in transition. She can grow with your changing needs. Changing needs. Another euphemism for the decline they all seem to expect, as if aging were a disease with a predictable progression rather than a natural process that affected everyone differently. What if my needs don't change the way you expect them to?" I asked. "What if I continue to be capable of managing my own life?" "Then we'll adjust," she said, but her tone suggested she didn't really believe that scenario was likely. In her mind, I was already on a path toward dependence, and the only question was how quickly I would reach the destination. The third interview was with Michael present, and by then I had developed a clearer understanding of what was really happening. The caregiver, Mrs. Patricia Adams, was the most pleasant of the three, with a background in nursing and a genuine warmth that made her seem less like a warden and more like a concerned daughter. But her assumptions about my needs were just as comprehensive as the others. She spoke about medication compliance, fall prevention, cognitive stimulation, and social engagement as if these were services I required rather than capabilities I possessed. She outlined a plan for gradually taking over more aspects of my daily life as my condition progressed, using language that made my inevitable decline sound like accepted medical fact rather than speculative concern. After all 3 interviews were complete, my children scheduled a family meeting to discuss their impressions and make a final decision. They asked for my input, but it was clear they expected me to choose from among the 3 options rather than reject the entire premise. Instead of answering immediately, I told them I needed a few days to process everything I'd learned. What I'd actually learned was that all three caregivers, despite their different personalities and approaches, shared the same fundamental assumption about my trajectory. They all expected me to become increasingly dependent, confused, and incapable. They were all prepared to take over my life gradually but systematically, with my children's enthusiastic support. None of them had asked about my goals, my preferences, my dreams for the future. None of them had inquired about what made me happy or what I valued about my current life. They had all focused on managing my decline rather than supporting my continued growth and independence. That weekend, I had my appointment with Dr. Sarah Kim, the geriatrician I'd contacted for an independent assessment of my physical and mental health. Her office was in a medical complex I'd never visited, ensuring that my family's opinions wouldn't influence her evaluation. Dr. Kim was a woman in her 50s with graying hair and a direct manner that I appreciated immediately. She spent nearly 2 hours with me, conducting physical examinations, cognitive tests, balance assessments, and detailed interviews about my daily activities, health history, and concerns. The cognitive testing was more comprehensive than anything my children had ever witnessed. Memory tests, problem-solving exercises, attention span assessments, reasoning tasks. I found myself actually enjoying the mental challenges, pleased to discover that my mind was sharper than I'd given myself credit for. "Mrs. Martinez," Dr. Kim said as she reviewed my results, "I'm going to be very direct with you. Based on everything I've observed today, you are functioning at a completely normal level for someone your age. Your cognitive abilities are actually above average in several areas. Your physical health is excellent, with no signs of balance issues or mobility limitations. That would put you at significant risk for falls." The relief was overwhelming, but I needed to understand the implications fully. What about the incidents my children described? The fall, the memory lapses, the repeated questions. Dr. Kim smiled with the patience of someone who had this conversation regularly. "Mrs. Martinez, every single thing your children described falls within the normal range of human experience, regardless of age. You had an accident in your garden. Accidents happen to people of all ages. You've asked repeated questions about complex financial matters. That's actually a sign of intelligence and caution, not confusion. You've forgotten some details. Welcome to being human." She pulled out a printed report and handed it to me. "I'm giving you a comprehensive written assessment that documents your cognitive and physical capabilities. Based on my evaluation, you do not require any level of supervised care. You are fully capable of independent living, financial management, and personal decision-making." The document in my hands felt like a weapon in the best possible way. Professional validation of what I'd known all along, that I was competent, capable, and nowhere near needing the kind of management my children were proposing. My appointment with Patricia Williams, the financial planner, was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I arrived at her office with copies of all my financial records, bank statements, investment portfolios, and insurance policies. I was nervous, but also excited to get an objective assessment of my money management skills. Patricia's office was warm and professional, with family photos on her desk and financial planning certificates on the walls. She was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 50s, with short auburn hair and an air of competent friendliness that put me at ease immediately. "Mrs. Martinez, I've had a chance to review the documents you sent over, and I have to say I'm impressed. You've made some very sophisticated financial decisions over the past 4 years. Your portfolio performance has been excellent." The validation was even more satisfying coming from a professional who understood the complexities of financial management. She walked me through my investments, explaining why my decisions had been sound and how my overall financial position had actually improved since my husband's death. "The transfers your family was concerned about," Patricia continued, "those were smart moves. You've optimized your interest rates, diversified your holdings, and positioned yourself well for both growth and security. This isn't the portfolio of someone who's confused about money. This is the work of someone who understands financial planning. For the next 2 hours, Patricia helped me understand not just where my money was, but where it could go. We discussed long-term care insurance, estate planning, charitable giving, and investment strategies for the next phase of my life. She treated me as a competent client with legitimate financial goals, not as a confused senior who needed protection from her own decision-making. As our meeting concluded, Patricia made an observation that would prove prophetic. "Mrs. Martinez, have you ever considered that you might have a real aptitude for financial planning? Your instincts are excellent, and you seem to genuinely enjoy the strategic thinking involved. There are always opportunities for people with your combination of intelligence and life experience to help others navigate similar challenges." The suggestion planted a seed that would soon grow into something much larger than either of us anticipated. But first, I had to deal with my children and their caregiver plan. Armed with Dr. Kim's medical assessment and Patricia's financial evaluation, I was finally ready for the confrontation I'd been building toward. I called a family meeting for the following Sunday, telling David, Jennifer, and Michael that I'd made my decision about the caregiver situation and wanted to discuss it with all of them present. They arrived expecting to hear which of the 3 candidates I'd chosen. Instead, they were about to discover that their mother wasn't the declining senior they'd imagined, but a competent woman who had been building her own plan for the future, while they'd been planning to manage her decline. Sunday afternoon arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that made everything feel possible. I had spent the morning preparing for what I knew would be one of the most important conversations of my life. Not by cooking elaborate meals this time, but by organizing documents and gathering the courage to reclaim my narrative from the people who thought they knew what was best for me. Don't just fight against what they're proposing. Figure out what you're fighting for. What does independence mean to you? What are your goals for the next 10 years? What would make you happy? Her questions forced me to think beyond the immediate crisis. What did I want my life to look like? I'd been so focused on maintaining my current routine that I hadn't really considered what I might want to change or improve. Carmen was right. I needed to be fighting for something positive, not just against something negative. Over the next few days, I found myself paying attention to my daily life in a new way, evaluating each activity and relationship through the lens of what brought me joy and satisfaction. My morning garden time was precious, a meditation that connected me to the cycles of growth and renewal. My volunteer work at the community center fulfilled my need to feel useful and valued. My friendships, though not numerous, were genuine and reciprocal. But there were also areas where I felt unfulfilled. I'd always been interested in financial planning, but had never pursued it seriously. I enjoyed helping people solve problems, but had limited my assistance to informal situations. I had energy and enthusiasm for new challenges, but had been constraining myself to familiar activities. Maybe this crisis was actually an opportunity to expand my life, rather than just defend it. Maybe I could use this as a catalyst to become more engaged, more active, more intentional about creating the kind of life I truly wanted. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. For years, I'd been content with the quiet retirement I'd built for myself. But contentment wasn't the same as fulfillment, and maybe it was time to reach for something more ambitious. By the weekend, I had a plan. I would get the medical evaluation Rosa had suggested, meet with the financial planner to get a professional assessment of my money management skills, and then sit down with my children armed with evidence rather than emotions. I would prove to them that their mother wasn't disappearing. She was just getting started. But first, I needed to understand exactly what they thought they were protecting me from. I needed to see these caregiver candidates they'd lined up, to understand what kind of life they were proposing for me. Sometimes the best way to fight against something is to let people see exactly what they're suggesting and allow the absurdity to speak for itself. I called David and told him I wanted to meet the caregivers. Not because I was accepting their plan, but because I wanted to understand it fully before making my own decision. He was clearly relieved, interpreting my request as capitulation rather than strategy. "That's wonderful, Mom. I knew once you had time to think about it, you'd see that we're just trying to help. The first interview is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock. As I hung up the phone, I smiled for the first time since this whole ordeal had begun. My children thought they were managing me toward acceptance of their plan. Instead, they were about to provide me with all the ammunition I needed to demonstrate exactly why their solution was not just unnecessary, but completely inappropriate for the woman I actually was, rather than the woman they imagined me to be. The battle for my independence was about to begin in earnest, and I was finally ready to fight it on my own terms. The first caregiver candidate arrived at my door exactly at 2 o'clock. Her punctuality apparently meant to demonstrate the kind of rigid scheduling my life would revolve around if my children had their way. Mrs. Gladys. Henderson was a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and the kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes. She carried a thick binder filled with references, certifications, and what appeared to be a detailed protocol for managing difficult seniors. David had arrived 30 minutes early, ostensibly to provide support, but really to ensure I didn't sabotage the interview process. He'd positioned himself in my living room like a supervisor, notepad in hand, ready to ask the questions he'd prepared. The whole scene felt like a job interview for a position I'd never applied for, to manage a life I was still perfectly capable of living. "Mrs. Martinez," Gladys began, settling into my armchair with practiced efficiency, "I've reviewed the information your son provided about your recent challenges. I want you to know that I specialize in clients who are experiencing the kind of cognitive and physical changes that come with advanced age. Advanced age. As if 68 were ancient rather than the beginning of what could be 20 or 30, more productive years." Her tone was professional but patronizing, the way someone might speak to a child who needed guidance rather than an adult who deserved respect. "What exactly do you understand about my situation?" I asked, genuinely curious about how my children had described me to this stranger. Gladys consulted her notes, reading from what was clearly a summary David had prepared. "You've had several concerning incidents recently: falls, memory lapses, confusion about financial matters, difficulty with routine activities. Your family is worried about your safety and wants to ensure you have appropriate support." Every word was technically accurate, but completely missed. The context that made those incidents normal rather than alarming. Yes, I'd fallen, but it was an accident, not evidence of mobility issues. Yes, I'd asked repeated questions about finances, but because I wanted to understand complex documents, not because I couldn't remember the answers. Yes, I'd made some mistakes, but they were the kind of mistakes any busy person makes when juggling multiple responsibilities. "What would my daily routine look like under your care?" I asked. Her face brightened, clearly pleased to outline her comprehensive approach to senior management. "I believe in structure and safety above all else. We'd establish a consistent daily schedule. Breakfast at 8, medications at 9, light exercise at 10, lunch at noon, rest period from 1 to 3, supervised activities in the afternoon, dinner at 6, evening medications at 8, bedtime at 9:30. The schedule was mind-numbing in its rigidity. No allowance for spontaneous activities, no flexibility for days when I might want to sleep late or stay up reading, no acknowledgement that I might have preferences about how to spend my time. I would become a patient following a treatment plan rather than a person living a life. "What about my volunteer work at the community center?" I asked. "Oh, we'd need to evaluate whether that's still appropriate," she replied. "Many of my clients find that outside activities become too challenging and overwhelming. I can arrange for more suitable activities here at home: adult coloring books, simple puzzles, basic crafts, things that are stimulating but not overly taxing." adult coloring books. The dining room table was set not with china and silverware, but with manila folders containing Dr. Kim's comprehensive medical evaluation, Patricia Williams's financial assessment, and a detailed plan I'd spent the past week developing for my future. I'd also prepared something else, a list of questions for my children about their own lives, their own challenges, their own plans for aging. If they wanted to discuss family planning, we were going to have a complete conversation. David arrived first, punctual as always, carrying what appeared to be contracts and paperwork related to whichever caregiver he assumed I'd selected. Jennifer came in a few minutes later with a bottle of wine and an expression of determined cheerfulness, the way she approached difficult real estate negotiations. Michael was last, looking uncomfortable in the way he always did when family meetings involved potential conflict. They settled around my table with the air of people prepared to finalize details rather than debate fundamentals. David opened his folder and pulled out what looked like employment agreements and fee schedules. So, Mom, which of the caregivers felt like the best fit? I think we were all impressed with Mrs. Collins, but Mrs. Henderson certainly had excellent references. Instead of answering his question, I handed each of them a copy of Dr. Kim's medical report. Before we discuss caregivers, I'd like you to read this. The silence that followed was profound as they absorbed the professional assessment that contradicted everything they'd assumed about my mental and physical condition. I watched their faces as they read Dr. Kim's conclusions. Cognitive function above average for my age group. Physical health excellent. No medical indication for supervised care. Fully capable of independent living and decision-making. Jennifer was the first to speak, her voice carefully controlled. Mom, this is just one doctor's opinion. We've been observing you for months, and we've seen concerning changes. You've seen what you expected to see, I replied, pulling out my second folder. Just like you saw concerning financial decisions when you looked at my investment portfolio. I handed them Patricia Williams's assessment, watching as their expressions shifted from skepticism to confusion to something that might have been embarrassment. The financial planner's evaluation was unambiguous. My money management had been sophisticated and successful, my portfolio performance impressive, my financial decision-making sound and strategic. Michael looked up from the documents with genuine bewilderment. Mom, I don't understand. We were worried that you were making risky or confused financial choices, but this says you've actually done better than most professional investors. That's because you never asked me to explain my decisions, I said. You saw activity you didn't recognize and assumed it must be evidence of confusion rather than competence. You collected examples of my supposed decline without ever giving me the chance to provide context. David was studying both reports with the attention he usually reserved for business documents, his expression growing more uncomfortable as the implications became clear. The morning after my conversation with Rosa, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in weeks. The fog of confusion and self-doubt that had settled over me since my children's intervention was beginning to lift, replaced by something sharper and more determined. If they wanted to treat this like a legal case, presenting evidence of my supposed decline, then I would build a counter case that demonstrated my continued competence and independence. My first call was to Riverside Medical Center, where I asked to schedule a comprehensive evaluation with a geriatrician who had no prior relationship with my family. The receptionist connected me with Dr. Elena Rodriguez, whose office could see me the following Thursday. When I explained that I needed a thorough assessment of my cognitive and physical health for personal planning purposes, she didn't ask questions beyond what was medically relevant. The appointment was scheduled for 2 hours, indicating the kind of comprehensive evaluation I was hoping for. Next, I contacted First National Bank and asked to speak with their financial planning department. I needed an objective professional assessment of my investment decisions and overall financial health. The representative transferred me to Patricia Williams, a certified financial planner who specialized in retirement and estate planning for seniors. Patricia's voice was warm but businesslike when she picked up the phone. Her tone immediately set her apart from the condescending way the caregiver candidates had spoken to me. She addressed me as an adult seeking professional consultation rather than a confused elderly person who needed guidance. "Mrs. Martinez, I understand you'd like to review your financial portfolio and discuss your planning options. Are you currently working with an advisor, or would this be our first consultation together?" "I've been managing everything independently since my husband passed away 4 years ago," I explained. "My children have expressed some concerns about my financial decisions, and I want to make sure I fully understand my position before making any major changes to my living situation." "That sounds very prudent," Patricia replied. "Many people find it helpful to get a professional perspective on their financial management, especially during times of transition. I have an opening next Tuesday afternoon at 2 o'clock. Would that work for you?" Her respectful tone and professional approach were exactly what I needed. She was treating me as a competent client seeking advice, not as a problem that needed to be managed. The distinction was subtle but crucial for my confidence. That afternoon, I decided to conduct my own investigation into my children's concerns. If they had been collecting evidence of my supposed decline, I would collect evidence of my continued competence. I started by making a list of everything I'd accomplished in the past month that demonstrated clear thinking, good judgment, and independent living skills. The list was longer than I'd expected. I'd successfully navigated a complex insurance claim when my roof had minor hail damage, researching contractors and managing the repair process from start to finish. I'd helped my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, understand her Medicare supplement options when her own daughter couldn't make sense of the paperwork. I'd organized and hosted a fundraising meeting for the community center's literacy program, coordinating schedules for 12 volunteers and developing a strategic plan that had already increased donations by 30%. Each accomplishment was recent, documented, and involved exactly the kind of complex problem-solving and organizational skills that my children claimed I was losing. But none of them had witnessed these activities because they'd become focused on isolated incidents that supported their predetermined narrative about my decline. I also decided to examine the specific incidents they'd cited as evidence of my confusion. The repeated phone calls to Jennifer about restaurant recommendations had happened because I was planning a surprise birthday dinner for Rosa and wanted to make sure I chose somewhere special she hadn't been before. The questions about Carlos's life insurance had been prompted by my desire to understand complex beneficiary language so I could make informed decisions about my estate planning. The forgotten restaurant closure had occurred because I'd been avoiding that part of town since Carlos died, not because I couldn't remember recent events. Every example they'd cited had a reasonable explanation that had nothing to do with cognitive decline and everything to do with being human. But they'd never asked for explanations. They'd simply observed behavior that seemed inconsistent with their expectations and drawn conclusions about my mental state. The realization was both liberating and infuriating. I wasn't losing my mind. I was just living my life in ways that sometimes didn't align with their assumptions about how I should be behaving. Their concern wasn't based on actual decline, but on their interpretation of normal human variation as pathological symptoms. Tuesday's appointment with Patricia Williams exceeded my expectations in every way. Her office was located in a professional building downtown with a view of the river and walls lined with certificates and awards that testified to her expertise in financial planning. She was a woman in her early 50s with silver-streaked brown hair and the kind of confident demeanor that came from years of helping people navigate complex financial decisions. "Mrs. Martinez, I've had a chance to review the documents you sent over in advance," she began, pulling out a thick folder with my name on it. "I have to say, I'm quite impressed with the portfolio management you've done since your husband's death. Your returns have been exceptional, and your risk management strategy is very sophisticated." The validation felt like sunshine after weeks of clouds. A professional was looking at my financial decisions and seeing competence rather than confusion. strategy rather than randomness. Your children mentioned concerns about large withdrawals and investment changes, Patricia continued. But looking at the actual transactions, these appear to be very smart moves. You've optimized your interest rates, diversified your holdings, and positioned yourself well for both growth and security. She walked me through each decision I'd made, explaining why they had been financially sound and how they had contributed to the overall improvement in my portfolio's performance. The transfers that had alarmed my children were actually evidence of sophisticated financial thinking, not confusion or poor judgment. Mrs. Martinez, have you considered that you might have a real aptitude for financial planning? Patricia asked as we concluded our review. Your instincts are excellent, and you seem to genuinely enjoy the strategic thinking involved in investment management. The suggestion was unexpected but intriguing. I had been finding satisfaction in managing my investments, researching market trends, and making strategic decisions about my financial future. What had started as necessity after Carlos's death had become something I actually enjoyed and apparently excelled at. I've been thinking about how to stay more engaged and intellectually challenged in retirement, I admitted. Most of my friends seem content with gardening and book clubs, but I need something more stimulating. Patricia smiled knowingly. There are always opportunities for people with your combination of intelligence, life experience, and financial acumen to help others navigate similar challenges. Many of my clients are people who never had the chance to develop financial literacy earlier in life and could benefit from patient, knowledgeable guidance. She handed me her business card with her personal number written on the back. If you're interested in exploring this further, I'd be happy to discuss some options. But first, let's focus on your immediate situation with your family. Based on my assessment, you're in excellent financial shape and fully capable of managing your own affairs. I'm preparing a comprehensive report that documents your financial competence, which might be useful in your discussions with your children. The report she promised would be another crucial piece of evidence in the case I was building for my continued independence. But I was also intrigued by her suggestion about helping others with financial planning. The idea of turning my newfound expertise into something meaningful and valuable to others was appealing in ways I hadn't expected. Thursday's medical appointment with Dr. Rodriguez was equally validating. Her office was in a newer medical complex on the outskirts of town, specializing in geriatric care with a focus on helping seniors maintain their independence and quality of life. The waiting room was filled with people my age and older, many of whom appeared to be there for routine maintenance rather than crisis intervention. Dr. Rodriguez was a petite woman in her 40s with kind eyes and an efficient manner that suggested she dealt regularly with family concerns about aging parents. She spent over an hour with me, conducting a comprehensive physical examination followed by extensive cognitive testing that was far more thorough than anything my children had ever witnessed. The cognitive assessment included memory tests, problem solving, exercises, attention span evaluations, and reasoning tasks. I found myself actually enjoying the mental challenges, pleased to discover that my mind was not only intact, but functioning at a high level. The doctor tested my ability to manage complex information, follow multi-step instructions, and make decisions under pressure. In every area, my performance was well within normal ranges for my age group and often above average. The physical examination was equally comprehensive, testing my balance, coordination, strength, and overall health. Dr. Rodriguez was particularly thorough in evaluating the factors that might contribute to falls or accidents, since that had been one of my children's primary concerns. Mrs. Martinez, she said as she completed her assessment, I'm going to be very direct with you. Based on everything I've observed today, you are functioning at a completely normal level for someone your age. Your cognitive abilities are actually above average in several areas, and your physical health is excellent. There are no medical indicators that would suggest you need supervised care or assistance with daily living activities. The relief was overwhelming. but I needed to understand the implications for my situation with my children. What about the incidents they described? The fall in the garden, the memory issues, the repeated questions? Dr. Rodriguez pulled out a notepad and reviewed the information I'd provided about my children's concerns. Mrs. Martinez, every single thing you've described falls within the normal range of human experience. You had an accident in your garden. Accidents happen to people of all ages and don't indicate underlying health problems unless they're part of a pattern, which yours aren't. You've asked repeated questions about complex matters. That's actually a sign of careful attention and thoroughness, not memory loss. You've forgotten some details. That's called being human. She handed me a printed report with her official letterhead. I'm providing you with a comprehensive medical assessment that documents your cognitive and physical capabilities. Based on my evaluation, you do not require any level of supervised care and are fully capable of independent living, financial management, and personal decision-making. The document felt like a shield against my children's well-meaning but misguided intervention. Professional medical validation of what I'd known all along, that I was competent, capable, and nowhere near needing the kind of management they were proposing. Over the weekend, I used my newfound confidence to take a hard look at my current life and consider what changes I might want to make proactively rather than reactively. Rosa had been right when she suggested I think about what I was fighting, for rather than just what I was fighting against. I'd been content with my quiet retirement routine, but contentment wasn't the same as fulfillment. Patricia's suggestion about helping others with financial planning had sparked an interest I hadn't expected. Dr. Rodriguez's cognitive testing had reminded me how much I enjoyed intellectual challenges and complex problem-solving. Maybe this crisis was actually an opportunity to expand my life rather than just defend it. I started researching opportunities for seniors who wanted to use their experience and skills in new ways. What I discovered was a whole world of possibilities I'd never considered. There were consulting opportunities for retired professionals, volunteer positions that utilized specific expertise, and even businesses that were specifically designed to benefit from the wisdom and experience of older adults. The idea that had been germinating since my conversation with Patricia began to take more concrete shape. I had successfully managed my own investments and apparently had a natural aptitude for financial planning. I enjoyed helping people solve complex problems and had years of experience breaking down complicated information into understandable pieces. There were undoubtedly other people my age who were struggling with financial decisions and could benefit from patient, knowledgeable guidance from someone who understood their situation. What if my children's intervention, instead of forcing me into dependence, actually pushed me toward a new kind of independence and purpose? What if their attempt to manage my decline became the catalyst for my continued growth and contribution? The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. I'd been living safely within the comfortable boundaries of my retirement routine, but safety wasn't the same as vitality. Maybe it was time to take some risks, to push beyond the familiar and see what else I was capable of achieving. Monday. Morning. I called Patricia Williams and asked if we could schedule another meeting to discuss her suggestion about helping others with financial planning. Her enthusiasm was immediate and infectious. Mrs. Martinez, I've been thinking about our conversation since we met, she said. I have several clients who could really benefit from the kind of patient, experienced guidance you could provide. People who are overwhelmed by financial decisions and need someone who understands both the technical aspects and the emotional challenges of managing money later in life. We scheduled a meeting for Wednesday afternoon to discuss specific opportunities and how I might begin to develop this unexpected new career direction. For the first time since this whole ordeal had begun, I was excited about the future rather than just defending the present. Tuesday evening, I called my sister Carmen in Phoenix to update her on my progress and seek her advice about the confrontation I was planning with my children. "You've been busy," she said approvingly after I described my medical and financial evaluations. Now you need to decide how to present this information in a way that will actually change their minds rather than just make them defensive. Her point was well taken. I couldn't simply attack their assumptions without giving them a face-saving way to adjust their position. They genuinely loved me and believed they were acting in my best interests. The challenge was helping them see that their assessment of my needs had been based on incomplete information rather than malicious intent. "What worked with your kids when you went through this?" I asked. "I didn't just prove them wrong," Carmen replied. "I proved them wrong while demonstrating that I was moving forward with positive plans for my future. I showed them that their mother wasn't declining. She was evolving. That made it easier for them to support my independence because they could see I was using it constructively." Her strategy made perfect sense. I needed to present my evidence of competence alongside a clear vision for what I planned to do with my continued independence. I couldn't just fight against their caregiver plan. I had to offer an alternative that was more compelling and reassuring than professional supervision. Wednesday's meeting with Patricia exceeded even my optimistic expectations. She had prepared a detailed proposal for how I could begin working with some of her clients who needed financial guidance and support. The arrangement would be informal at first, more like mentoring than formal consulting, but it could develop into something more substantial if I found it fulfilling and her clients found it valuable. "I have 3 clients in particular who I think would benefit enormously from your approach," Patricia explained. "Margaret Chen is 72 and completely overwhelmed by her investment options after her husband's death. Frank Rodriguez is 68 and has been making poor financial decisions because he doesn't understand the basics of portfolio management. And Dorothy Williams is 75 and needs help organizing her estate planning, but finds traditional financial advisors intimidating." Each client sounded like someone I could genuinely help, people whose situations I understood from personal experience and whose challenges I could address with both technical knowledge and emotional support. "What would my role be exactly?" I asked. "Think of yourself as a financial mentor," Patricia replied. "You'd meet with them regularly to help them understand their options, work through their concerns, and make informed decisions about their money. I'd provide the technical expertise and regulatory oversight, but you'd provide the patient guidance and emotional support that they really need." The arrangement sounded perfect, meaningful work that utilized my skills and experience while helping people who genuinely needed support. It was exactly the kind of purposeful activity that would demonstrate to my children that their mother wasn't declining, but rather discovering new ways to contribute and grow. By Thursday evening, I had assembled a comprehensive case for my continued independence, medical documentation of my competence, financial evidence of my acumen, and a concrete plan for meaningful engagement that would utilize my skills while providing the kind of intellectual stimulation I needed to remain sharp and fulfilled. All that remained was presenting this information to my children in a way that would help them understand that their concerns, while well-intentioned, had been based on incomplete information and faulty assumptions. The woman they thought needed managing was actually ready to take on new challenges and responsibilities. Friday morning, I called David and asked him to coordinate a family meeting for Sunday afternoon. I told him I'd made my decision about the caregiver situation and wanted to discuss it with all of them present. His relief was audible over the phone. "I'm so glad you've accepted that you need help, Mom. I think you're going to find that having professional support will actually increase your independence rather than limiting it." I didn't correct his assumption about what I'd decided. Sunday's meeting would reveal that his mother had indeed made a decision about her future, but it wasn't the decision he was expecting. The woman he thought needed professional care was about to become a professional herself, helping others navigate the exact challenges he'd assumed she couldn't handle on her own. The battle for my independence was about to reach its climax, and I was finally ready to fight it on my own terms with the evidence and confidence I needed to reclaim control of my own narrative. Sunday afternoon arrived with the kind of crisp autumn sunshine that made everything feel possible. I had spent the morning preparing not with cooking and cleaning, but with organizing the documents and evidence that would fundamentally change how my children saw me. The dining room table was arranged not with fine china and family photos, but with manila folders containing Dr. Rodriguez's comprehensive medical evaluation, Patricia Williams' financial assessment, and detailed plans for a future none of them could have imagined. David arrived first, carrying a briefcase that undoubtedly contained caregiver contracts and payment schedules. His expression was one of relieved anticipation, clearly expecting to finalize arrangements for my supervised care. Jennifer followed 15 minutes later with a bottle of wine and her brightest real estate smile, the one she used when closing difficult deals. Michael came last, looking uncomfortable but resigned, carrying what appeared to be financial projections for the cost of my care. They settled around my table with the confidence of people who had solved a problem rather than the openness of family members preparing for genuine discussion. The contrast between their assumptions and my reality was about to become devastatingly clear. David opened his briefcase and pulled out several documents. "Mom, we've done some additional research since the interviews, and we really think Mrs. Collins would be the best fit. She has experience with clients who are in your situation, and her references are outstanding. I've brought the employment agreement for you to review." Instead of reaching for his papers, I handed each of them a copy of Dr. Rodriguez's medical report. The silence that followed was profound as they absorbed professional conclusions that contradicted every assumption they'd made about my mental and physical condition. Jennifer was the first to speak, her voice carefully, controlled in the way she managed difficult clients. "Mom, this is just one doctor's opinion. We've been observing you for months, and we've seen concerning patterns." "You've seen what you expected to see," I replied, distributing copies of Patricia Williams's financial assessment. "Just like you interpreted my investment decisions as evidence of confusion rather than competence." Michael's expression shifted, from confusion to something approaching embarrassment as he read the financial planner's evaluation. "Mom, this says your portfolio performance has been exceptional, that you've made sophisticated decisions that most professional investors would admire." "That's because you never asked me to explain my financial choices," I said. "You saw activity you didn't understand and assumed it must indicate decline rather than growth. You collected isolated incidents as evidence without ever seeking context or explanation." David was studying both reports with growing discomfort, his certainty beginning to crack. "So, you're saying we've been wrong about everything? That you don't need any help or support?" "I'm saying you've been wrong about what kind of help I need," I replied. "You assumed I needed protection from my own decisions. What I actually needed was recognition of my continued capabilities and support for my future goals." I pulled out the third folder, the one that would transform this conversation completely. "I want you to meet someone who's been helping me develop a new direction for my life. Someone you might mistake for a caregiver, but who's actually been empowering me to discover capabilities I didn't even know I possessed." The confusion on their faces was evident as I explained how I'd been working with Patricia Williams, not as a patient seeking protection from financial complexity, but as a client developing expertise in financial planning and investment strategy. How our meetings had evolved from reviewing my portfolio to exploring opportunities for me to help other seniors navigate similar challenges. "Patricia has been coming to the house twice a week for the past month," I continued, watching their expressions change as they processed this information. "If you'd been paying attention instead of planning my decline, you might have noticed her car in my driveway. You might have wondered who I was meeting with and why I seemed more energetic and engaged than I'd been in years." Jennifer leaned forward, her real estate instinct sensing that the deal she'd thought was closed was actually falling apart. "Mom, you're saying this financial planner has been coming to the house? For what purpose?" "Initially to help me understand my financial position and options, but Patricia recognized something you've all missed. She saw potential where you saw decline. She identified capabilities where you assumed confusion. She's been helping me develop those capabilities into something meaningful and valuable. I opened the folder and pulled out the business plan Patricia and I had developed. Together, I'm starting a financial mentoring service for seniors who need guidance and support with their investment decisions. Patricia provides the professional oversight and regulatory compliance. I provide the patient teaching and emotional support that comes from someone who's navigated these challenges personally. The silence stretched as they absorbed this information. Their mother, whom they'd diagnosed as needing constant supervision, was actually launching a new career that utilized her intelligence and experience to help others. David's voice was barely above a whisper when he finally spoke. "You're starting a business? At your age?" "At my age, I have decades of life experience, 4 years of successful investment management, and the time and energy to help people who are struggling with exactly the challenges I've mastered." Patricia says I have a natural gift for financial planning and communication. My first 3 clients are already seeing significant improvements in their portfolios and their confidence. Michael looked stunned. "You already have clients?" "Margaret Chen hired me to help her understand her investment options after her husband died. She was paralyzed by fear and confusion, making poor decisions because she didn't understand her choices. In 3 weeks, we've organized her portfolio, improved her returns, and given her the knowledge she needs to make informed decisions going forward." I pulled out a letter Margaret had written, thanking me for helping her regain control of her financial life. Frank Rodriguez was making emotional investment decisions that were destroying his retirement security. We've developed a systematic approach that's already recovered most of his losses and positioned him for stable growth. Another letter of gratitude, this one from Frank's daughter, expressing amazement at her father's newfound financial confidence and improved decision-making. Dorothy Williams needed help with estate planning, but found traditional financial advisors intimidating and condescending. I've been helping her understand her options and make decisions that reflect her values and priorities. Her lawyer says it's the most thoughtful estate plan he's reviewed in years. Jennifer was shaking her head slowly, as if trying to reconcile this information with her preconceptions about my capabilities. But Mom, the fall, the memory issues, the confusion about finances. The fall was an accident that could happen to anyone. The memory issues were normal human forgetfulness that you interpreted as symptoms. The financial confusion existed only in your minds because you never asked me to explain decisions that were actually quite sophisticated. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden I'd planted and maintained without help, the symbol of my continued ability to nurture and create. You've been so focused on protecting me from imaginary decline that you missed my actual growth and development. While you were planning to manage my supposedly failing mind, I was discovering new ways to use my intelligence and experience. David cleared his throat, his discomfort evident. So when Patricia Williams comes to the house twice a week, she's not my caregiver. She's my business partner and mentor. We review client cases, develop teaching strategies, and plan the expansion of our mentoring program. She treats me as an equal partner in this enterprise, not as a confused senior who needs supervision. The irony was delicious and devastating. They'd wanted to hire someone to watch over me and manage my decline. Instead, I'd found someone who recognized my potential and helped me develop it into something valuable and meaningful. Michael was studying the business plan with his accountant's eye for detail. "Mom, this is actually quite impressive. The financial projections, the client testimonials, the growth strategy. This isn't the work of someone who needs cognitive support. It's the work of someone who needed intellectual challenge and purposeful engagement," I replied. "Something none of the caregivers you interviewed would have provided. They were prepared to help me decline gracefully. Patricia helped me discover I wasn't declining at all." Jennifer was crying now, tears of what I hoped was recognition rather than frustration. We thought we were protecting you. We were so scared of something happening to you that we couldn't see you were actually thriving. You were protecting the version of me that existed in your fears rather than the version that exists in reality, I said gently. The woman you thought needed constant supervision is actually helping other people solve complex problems and make important decisions. David gathered the caregiver contracts and put them back in his briefcase, his movements slow and deliberate. So what happens now? With us, I mean. How do we move forward from here? We start over with accurate information instead of assumptions, I suggested. You learn about the work I'm actually doing instead of the decline you imagined was happening. You support my growth instead of trying to manage my supposed deterioration. I pulled out the final document in my folder, a detailed plan for how my new career would develop over the coming years. Patricia and I are expanding the mentoring program. We're developing workshops for seniors who want to learn about financial planning. We're creating resources for families who are navigating money management during transitions. I'm going to be busier and more intellectually engaged than I've been since I retired from teaching. Michael looked up from the business plan with something approaching awe. Mom, you could actually make significant income from this. These projected fees, if you build the client base you're planning. I could be financially independent in ways I never imagined, I confirmed. Not just managing my existing resources, but creating new income streams that utilize my skills and experience. The woman you thought needed financial protection might actually become quite wealthy through her own efforts. The transformation in their expressions was remarkable. David, who had arrived expecting to finalize care arrangements for his declining mother, was looking at business projections for her entrepreneurial venture. Jennifer, who had been preparing to manage her mother's transition to dependence, was reviewing client testimonials about her mother's professional competence. Michael, who had calculated the cost of his mother's care, was analyzing the profitability of her new career. There's something else you should know, I added, deciding to complete their education about who their mother actually was. Patricia has suggested that I consider getting certified as a financial planning consultant. The coursework would take about 18 months, and I'd have access to additional resources and opportunities for helping people. David's laugh was shaky but genuine. So instead of needing someone to help you with basic decisions, you're planning to get professional credentials to help other people with their financial planning? Exactly. The mind you thought was failing is actually capable of mastering new skills and taking on greater responsibilities. The woman you wanted to protect from her own poor judgment is being sought out by others who value her advice and guidance. Jennifer wiped her eyes and looked around the table at her brothers. We really got this wrong, didn't we? We were so busy planning Mom's decline that we missed her renaissance. You got it wrong because you were scared, I said, my voice gentler now that the confrontation was over. Scared of losing me, scared of responsibilities you might have to take on, scared of facing your own aging process. But fear made you see problems that didn't exist and miss opportunities that did. Patricia Williams had been scheduled to arrive at 4 o'clock for our weekly planning meeting, and her timing was perfect. When the doorbell rang, my children looked confused until I explained that my business partner had arrived for our appointment. Patricia entered with her usual professional warmth, carrying the folders and documents that had become familiar parts of our working relationship. She greeted my children politely, but without the deference they might have expected from someone they'd assumed was a hired caregiver. Mrs. Martinez, I have the updated client profiles and the materials for next week's workshop planning, Patricia said, setting her briefcase on my table as if this were her regular office. Oh, and Margaret Chen called to thank you again for helping her understand her IRA rollover options. She said you explained it better than her bank's investment specialist. The casual competence of our interaction was the final piece of evidence my children needed. This wasn't a caregiver checking on a confused patient. This was a business partnership between equals, a collaboration that respected my intelligence and utilized my capabilities. David spoke first, his voice subdued but respectful. "Ms. Williams, I owe you an apology. We assumed you were here in a caregiving capacity, but it's clear you're working with our mother as a professional colleague." Patricia's smile was understanding but firm. "Your mother is one of the most naturally talented financial mentors I've ever worked with. Her combination of analytical thinking, communication skills, and emotional intelligence makes her exceptionally effective at helping people navigate complex financial decisions. I'm honored to be her partner in this work." Jennifer leaned forward, her curiosity overriding her embarrassment. "What exactly does my mother do in your sessions with clients?" "She does what she's always done," Patricia replied. "She teaches, guides, and supports people who are struggling to understand complicated information. The difference is that now she's doing it with financial planning instead of elementary education. Her clients trust her because she's been where they are and successfully navigated the challenges they're facing." Michael was taking notes, his accountant's mind processing this new understanding of his mother's capabilities. "And the business potential? Is this sustainable long-term?" Patricia pulled out her own projections, documents that showed the growing demand for the kind of personalized financial guidance I was providing. "The market for senior financial mentoring is expanding rapidly. Traditional financial advisors often lack the patience and communication skills needed to work effectively with older clients who feel overwhelmed by complex investment decisions. Linda fills that gap perfectly." For the next hour, Patricia and I conducted our regular business meeting while my children observed. They watched me review client cases with professional competence, discuss complex financial strategies with confidence, and plan workshop curricula with creative enthusiasm. The woman they'd thought needed supervision was actually supervising the financial education of others. As Patricia prepared to leave, she turned to my children with a final observation. "Your mother has found her calling in this work. She's happier, more engaged, and more intellectually stimulated than most people half her age. Whatever concerns you had about her well-being, I hope you can see that she's actually thriving in ways that would be impossible under constant supervision." After Patricia left, my children and I sat in contemplative silence, processing the afternoon's revelations. The entire foundation of their intervention had crumbled, replaced by a reality none of them had imagined possible. David was the first to speak, his voice heavy with regret. "Mom, I don't know how to apologize for what we almost did to you. We came so close to destroying something beautiful because we couldn't see past our own fears." "You didn't almost destroy anything," I assured him. "You actually helped me discover something I might never have found otherwise. Your concerns forced me to examine my life critically, to seek professional validation, and to explore new possibilities. Without your intervention, I might never have met Patricia or discovered this new career direction." Jennifer was shaking her head in amazement. "So, when we were planning to hire someone to manage your decline, you were actually planning to manage other people's financial growth?" "Life has a sense of irony," I agreed. "The woman you thought needed constant care turned out to be capable of providing professional guidance to others. The mind you worried was failing was actually ready for new challenges and responsibilities." Michael looked up from his notes with genuine admiration. "Mom, can I ask you something? How did you know you could do this? How did you have the confidence to start a business at 68? "I didn't know I could do it until I tried," I replied honestly. "But I knew I couldn't accept the alternative you were offering. The choice between declining gracefully under supervision or growing boldly through challenge wasn't really a choice at all." As the afternoon wound down, my children began making plans to support my new venture rather than manage my supposed decline. David offered to help with business planning and legal structures. Jennifer volunteered to use her marketing skills to help develop promotional materials. Michael suggested ways to optimize the financial aspects of the expanding mentoring program, The transformation was complete. The family meeting that was supposed to finalize my transition to dependence had instead launched my transition to a new kind of independence and purpose. The caregiver they'd thought I needed had turned out to be the business partner I'd actually found. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my home office, which we've converted from the guest bedroom into a professional workspace where I meet with clients and conduct financial planning workshops. The mentoring program has grown beyond our most optimistic projections, with a waiting list of seniors who want the kind of patient, experienced guidance I provide. My children have become my biggest supporters and advocates. David refers clients from his business network who have aging parents struggling with financial decisions. Jennifer includes information about our services in her real estate client communications, knowing that many of her buyers and sellers are dealing with major financial transitions. Michael has helped us develop more sophisticated business systems and projections for continued growth. The relationship with Patricia has evolved into something much deeper than a business partnership. She's become a mentor, friend, and collaborator who continues to see potential in me that I'm still discovering. Our twice-weekly meetings have become the highlight of my schedule, times when I feel most engaged and intellectually alive. But the greatest satisfaction comes from the clients themselves. Margaret Chen now manages her OWN portfolio with confidence and has actually become quite successful at identifying undervalued investment opportunities. Frank Rodriguez has recovered from his emotional investment mistakes and is on track for a comfortable retirement. Dorothy Williams completed her estate planning with such thoroughness that her family lawyer asked if she'd worked in legal or financial planning herself. Each success story validates not just my professional competence, but my continued capacity for growth, learning, and contribution. The woman my children thought was declining has actually been ascending, discovering capabilities and purposes she never knew she possessed. The irony isn't lost on me that their attempt to protect me from my own poor judgment led me to develop judgment that others now seek out and value. Their effort to shield me from complex decisions resulted in my becoming someone who helps others navigate complexity with confidence and success. Looking back, I can see that this whole experience was exactly what I needed, even though it wasn't what any of us expected. My children's intervention, misguided though it was, forced me to examine my life critically and discover possibilities I might never have explored otherwise. Their assumption that I needed care led me to prove that I was capable of providing care to others. The woman who was supposed to need a caregiver turned out to be someone whose care and guidance others desperately needed. The mind that was supposedly failing was actually ready for its most challenging and rewarding work. The independence they thought I was losing was actually expanding into areas I'd never imagined possible. Sometimes the people who love us most can see us least clearly, interpreting their own fears as our realities. But sometimes those fears, misguided though they may be, can push us toward truths about ourselves that we might never have discovered in comfort and complacency. I'm 69. Now, busier and more intellectually engaged than I've been since my teaching days. My calendar is full of client meetings, workshop planning sessions, and business development activities. My mind is sharp from constant challenge and stimulation. My purpose is clear and deeply satisfying. The caregiver my children thought I needed turned out to be the career I'd never known I wanted. The supervision they planned for my decline became the partnership that supported my growth. The woman they worried was disappearing had actually just been waiting for the right opportunity to fully appear. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.